Welcome back. Here's a reminder of the top stories on Al Jazeera. ISIL fighters have launched a series of bomb blasts in the center of the Indonesian capital, Jakarta. Let me take you straight now to the United Nations. That is Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to make a statement on Syria. Let's listen.
My outrage over the attacks in Indonesia and Turkey, and my condolences to the victims and people of those two countries. Ladies and gentlemen, I have just briefed the General Assembly on action we must take in the coming year. Let me reiterate 2 points. First, we must get off to a fast start in implementing the two towering achievements of 2015, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement on climate change. Both are triumphs of multilateralism. Now we have to bring them to life for every person in every country. Second, we must bridge the divisions that have kept the Syrians in agony, plunged Yemen into darkness, and helped to spawn violent extremism. Perhaps nothing more urgently reflects the need to act than the harrowing scenes from Madaya in Syria. In a conflict that has already reached shocking depth of inhumanity, the suffering there is another law. UN teams have witnessed the scenes that haunt the soul. The elderly and children, men and women, who are little more than skin and bones, gaunt, severely malnourished, so weak they could barely walk, and utterly desperate for the slightest morsel. There can be no denying their suffering. Many hundreds of people are in such a dire state that they require immediate medical attention, including through possible evacuation. We are working to get medical teams and mobile clinics on the ground right away. I want to make a special plea for those in besieged areas of Syria. I would say they are being held hostage, but it is even worse. Hostages get fed. These children and women and men are struggling to survive without food or medicine. It has never been easy for the United Nations and its partners to reach these in such desperate need. But the situation is getting worse. Today, almost 400,000 people are besieged in Syria, roughly half in areas controlled by Daesh, 180,000 in areas controlled by the Syrian government and its allies, and some 12,000 in areas controlled by opposition armed groups. In 2014, the UN and partners were able to deliver food to about 5% of people in besieged areas. Today, we are reaching less than 1%. This is utterly unconscionable. Along with food, the people we have encountered want answers. Who cares our lives? Where is the international community? Who will speak for us? Let me be clear. The use of starvation as a weapon of war is a war crime. All sides, including Syrian government, which has the primary responsibility to protect Syrians, are committing this and other atrocious acts prohibited under international humanitarian law. States in the region and beyond that can make a difference must press the parties for sustained and unimpeded humanitarian access throughout Syria. I speak specifically about members of the International Syria Support Group. Other urgent measures are needed, such as the immediate end to the use of indiscriminate weapons in civilian areas, including through shelling and airstrikes by any of the parties involved militarily in Syria. No cause can justify the toll in Syrian civilian lives and destroyed schools, clinics, and markets that we continue to register around the country every day. This is fundamental to the credibility of the renewed political process. My special envoy, Mr. Staffan de Mistura, will continue to work towards convening intra-Syrian Geneva talks on 25th January. Let me also say a few words about the crisis in Yemen. In recent days, we have seen intensified airstrikes, ground fighting, and shelling. We also have worrying reports of cluster munitions attacks on Sana'a, which again could constitute a war crime. My special envoy, Ismail Ould Sheikh Ahmed, was in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi last week. He is now in Yemen to continue consultations with the parties on the urgent need for confidence-building measures and the new round of UN-sponsored negotiation. A release of detainees, a renewed and sustainable ceasefire, and improved humanitarian access are crucial. Finally, I'd like to reiterate my deep concern about the highly unstable and unpredictable situation in Burundi. Violence could deepen inside the country and spill across borders. The government must take steps to build confidence, including releasing prisoners of conscience and lifting restrictions on civil society. In that regard, I welcome and commend the visit of the Security Council next week, as well as the efforts of the African Union. We must do all we can to break the political impasse and avert a humanitarian catastrophe. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Secretary General, you've just said that you believe what had happened in Madaya was a war crime. Do you believe now the Security Council should follow your strong lead and refer this to the International Criminal Court? And on the meeting of the 25th, should at the top of the agenda be trying to get access to these besieged places?
It's up to Security Council now. Security Council has taken very important resolution on December 18 last year, 2254. That was the unity and solidarity the Security Council members, particularly permanent members, have shown their political will to see there must be a political solution. And if and when there's a political solution is established, then there will be naturally much easier way for us to deliver humanitarian assistance. In that regard, I leave it to Security Council members to determine and take necessary measures, actions on these war crimes. And when this meeting is held on January 15th, I think in addition to and in parallel to political negotiation, this how to deliver a humanitarian assistance without any impediment should be discussed. This is a very important confidence-building measures, which I have discussed yesterday with Mr. de Mistura. Yeah.
Sure, Wendy. Thank you.
Secretary General, thank you very much.
That was the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon answering a question by our diplomatic editor James Bays there, who'd asked him whether, seeing as during his speech he had said that the use of starvation as a weapon of war is a war crime, and James Bays put to him whether that means that he was going to refer the parties to the International Criminal Court, and Ban Ki-moon replied that that would be up to the Security Council. Ban Ki-moon really speaking strongly about the towns in Syria, as we've been seeing over the past few days, where people there have been starved. He mentioned of the suffering, the undeniable suffering of the people. He also mentioned that the UN had been able to deliver food to about 5% of people in besieged areas in 2014, and that now actually the UN was reaching less than 1% of the people there. He called this fact utterly unconscionable. Well, let's cross live now to Beirut in Lebanon and speak to Al Jazeera's Caroline Malone. Caroline, of course, you've done so many pieces, haven't you? A lot of reports from the many refugee camps around Lebanon. And I hate to say it, the people that get there, I know it's a cliche, but they are the lucky ones, because many of the people still in Syria, as we've been seeing, are literally being starved to death in many of the besieged areas. What did you make of the words that we heard, the strong words from Ban Ki-moon?
Well, we're absolutely seeing from the people that we speak to the kind of horrible situations that people are suffering from in Syria. In the last few days, we've met two families in particular, a couple who've come from Douma. That's an area just outside of Damascus. They had to sneak here in tunnels. They thought they were going to die along the way. It was so difficult to get to Lebanon, to the Lebanon side of the border. They were allowed in because the husband is older and he has a heart problem, so they were given some sympathy and allowed through the border that's mainly closed actually to Syrians now. But they spoke to us about some of the scenes in Douma and said they've had no food for months. Even the little aid that does get in is controlled by groups within Douma, and they sell it on. So people without any money are not able to even get any of the aid that does come in. Then, of course, we've heard a lot about Madaya, because there's been aid delivered to Madaya this week. The ICRC Director of Operations was speaking from the UN earlier today as well. And he's been saying that the gap between the kind of needs that people, the humanitarian needs that people have in Syria right now, and what they're actually getting is bigger than ever 5 years on. We're talking about basic things here, things like food, things like any kind of medicine. There are no medics. There's apparently one medic in Madaya, and when ICRC and their convoy arrived and the medic saw them, the medic was in tears because of such relief to be able to see some sort of support. Today, in fact, there are 400 people in a hospital in Madaya who are suffering from symptoms as a result of not getting enough food. Things like malnutrition, illnesses, effects to the organs because they're just not getting enough food. And the aid deliveries that have got in this week, it's only enough to last people of Madaya, 40,000 people, for 1 month. So while it's great that they are getting aid, it's definitely not a long-term fix. It's definitely a short-term fix. And as Ban Ki-moon was saying, something has to be done to help the 400,000 people who are still under siege in different parts of Syria.
Yes, and the ICRC and the UN, obviously, it took them a long time to negotiate even this delivery that we've seen in the past week. Caroline, from the people that you speak to that actually do manage to get to some kind of safety in Lebanon, psychologically, how damaging is the idea of a siege? Because obviously we've seen a lot of bombardments, a lot of killing, a lot of fighting in Syria. But how much do you think it weighs on their mind, that the fear that wherever they are, actually they could be blocked in for heaven knows how long?
Well, we've met some children recently as well, and the scarring is very clear in their faces. 2 children actually who'd escaped from Madaya in the last week or so. Some of their families are still stuck there, and when they came in a car that was part of a smuggling group that got them through, their father was actually taken from the car. So they were very upset, of course, that their father is now being taken by the Syrian government forces and is now in Syria. They did get to this side. And you could just see in their faces the kind of suffering they'd been through. The boy, who was 13 years old, talked about how he'd been attending schools in Madaya, but really there was no school because none of the children were able to concentrate. They hadn't eaten enough for so long that it meant that the schooling was kind of useless, basically. There were kids very sick, kids throwing up. His younger sister was phases of being blank because she was clearly so upset at having to talk about the experience she'd just had a few weeks before. And you can only imagine then, if these are the children who are getting to Lebanon, what it must be like for those who are still inside, who are still in places like Madaya, who are in Idlib, in the towns where aid's also been delivered as well. It's a huge amount of psychological scarring that people must be having at the moment. as well as, of course, still that desperate need to get food and other medical aid.
So many horrific stories coming out of Syria. Caroline Malone in Beirut. Caroline, thank you. And now let's go straight live back to the United Nations, where we can speak to our diplomatic editor, James Bays. James, you asked Ban Ki-moon that question about whether having called starvation effectively a war crime, whether that meant that the perpetrators could be sent to the International Criminal Court.
And of course they can't until a proceeding of the International Criminal Court starts, and that can only happen a number of ways, and the only likely way in the Syrian conflict if there was a referral by the UN Security Council to the International Criminal Court. And clearly Ban Ki-moon has made a pretty strong statement now about Madaya. The UN in the last few days have been saying we must not see food used as a weapon in war. This may amount to a war crime. He was much stronger in the comments he just made to us, the press, and before that to the UN General Assembly, saying in his view this is a war crime. It clearly goes further than he's gone before on this issue. Clearly, the UN Secretary General has a great deal of moral authority here, but I don't think it's going to change the dynamics in the UN Security Council, where any referral of this issue to the International Criminal Court, which takes a vote in the Security Council, would trigger a veto by the US, by the Russians and the Chinese. Also worth noting, he's talking and looking forward to that meeting on the 25th of January and confirming something that I've been hearing, that perhaps these sieged areas may well be the opening part of the negotiations that take place in Geneva. He referred to them possibly as confidence building measures, that perhaps they could get some concessions on this issue before looking at the big political picture.
James Bays live at the UN. James, thank you.